Yeah, what's this? Cool Hearthstone cards? That's right. We actually have some insane stuff in today's video. I know those last couple reviews were a little bit of a bummer with all the like neutral commons and stuff, but now we're getting into the class cards and we've got some insane stuff, as you can already see right here behind me. So let's go ahead and jump into a bunch of cool Death Knight cards here to talk about for our latest Across the Timeways review. Starting off here with Husk Eternal Reaper. This is a 4-mana 5/3 undead with his sick battle cry. Give your hero Death Rattle, spend up to 20 corpses to resurrect with that much health. You thought I was dead? No, just kidding. I've got Husk here and I've got 20 corpses. So you tried to kill me and I jump right back up to 20. It's you know, kind of an ice block and a Reno together, right? All in one, except it's not actually like ice block, right? Because if they have enough damage, if they have 50 damage on board, you know, they could drop you from 30 to 0. You heal back up to 20 on your resurrect, and then they still just dome you for another 20, assuming you know, clean breakpoints and stuff. So it is still possible to kind of double kill you through this Husk Eternal Reaper, but you know, presumably that 20 extra health is going to give you a lot more breathing room, going to create some awkwardness for the opponent. You know, and then you're a Death Knight, you're probably playing this in a deck that's controlling, that's slower, that's got some life gain, recovery stuff. So, you know, you get your second wind, you heal up a little bit, you clear the opponent's board, and boom, Husk bought you some really nice time and basically kind of healed 20 or up to 20 for a 4-drop. And the nice thing is, too, you can just play this preemptively, right? You just slam it down on turn 4, and it's just there waiting forever, right? You don't have to worry about it. And 4 mana is not a huge commitment, I would say, for something like a control deck like this. You know, yeah, sometimes you'd rather play an Elise and like get your location going, but I don't think it's going to be too hard to weave this in on time in many cases. The bigger challenge perhaps for this card might actually just be that corpse management side of it. If you're playing a control Death Knight that's looking to, you know, grind games out and have lots of health and stuff to work with, are you also going to have 20 corpses? Like 20 is a lot to get to, you know. Getting 5 or 10, that seems a lot more feasible, but is 5 or 10 extra health going to be enough in some cases? You know, like we said, opponent can just kind of punch through and kill you twice if you don't have enough health to work with. So it just becomes a bit of a you know, management question then about corpses versus health and like game state and all these various things. And it becomes like a deck building challenge too. Like, do I have enough bodies? Do I have enough undead, corpse generating cards, whatever it is, to make this reliable? Then how much of that do you commit to the deck? And would you just be better off, you know, running a 4-cost rush card that like, hey, this just killed something, it prevented the opponent from snowballing, or, you know, a 4-cost removal card instead of something like this? Like, can you actually kind of net more and put yourself in a better spot by just playing, you know, a better control card in the place of this? I think that's where that question falls, but I ultimately do think people will run this in greedier control Death Knight decks just because they'll have room to. And it's like, it's just one card. It can be a really nice bonus, particularly as the game goes on and on and on. You know, you're just naturally going to accrue some corpses by playing stuff down. So even if you just get 10 or 15 health, that could make a difference, could buy that window here and there and really give you time to stabilize. And at the end of the day, I'm saying, hey, it's 4 mana, which isn't a lot for a control deck. Like, yeah, it's bad on board, only 3 health, but it's something at least on turn 4. And then you're really hoping that it gives you that extra time, that you hit your power band late and you just recover and get there. And I think that'll happen. I don't think this is like totally broken or anything, but I think it's still pretty good and we'll definitely see play because we see these kinds of Death Knights finding lots of success. All right, so moving on to our next legendary here. This is Talanji of the Graves, which honestly looks really, really cool. Those floating swords are awesome. This is a 4-mana 4/5 undead, a fabled card, which means when you add this to your deck, you're also going to get Bwonsamdi and What Befell Zandalar, 2 additional legendary cards added to your deck for free. And then the battle cry on Talanji reads, draw Bwonsamdi, or resurrect him if he has died, and then choose a boon to give him. And I will just go ahead and show you guys the boons here real quick on a separate screen because everything didn't fit. There are basically 3 boons. The boon of speed gives Bwonsamdi rush permanently. Minions summoned by his death rattle cost 2 more. And then you can also give Bwonsamdi lifesteal. And again, minions summoned by his death rattle cost 2 more. And then also the boon of power, give him taunt, and minions summoned by his death rattle cost 2 more. And you'll note his death rattle here is a summon a random 4 cost minion. So, you know, if you give him a boon, that goes up to summon a random 6, and then another boon goes up to summon a random 8 cost minion. So, you know, he is a 6-drop that summons, you know, potentially something really big. Also, any of the boons you give to Bwonsamdi apparently carry over to the 4 cost minion, at least based on the reading of that. So the 4 cost minion presumably has like taunt and lifesteal, or rush and lifesteal, and you get like, you know, a 6-mana 6/6 with rush and lifesteal that, you know, you trade in, it summons maybe a 6 or an 8 cost that also has rush and lifesteal and can trade in. And like, man, that is a crazy stabilizing sort of turn. We've also got What Befell Zandalar here. We didn't even talk about. Deal 2 damage to all enemies, so a little bit of a consecration effect here, and then choose a boon again to give Bwonsamdi. So both the spell and Talanji can give the boons to Bwonsamdi. So, you know, depending on draw order and everything, of course, because you're not always going to get Talanji first, vice versa, etc. You know, but basically, you might expect your Bwonsamdi to be, you know, summoning 6 or 8 cost stuff pretty regularly, and then, you know, I think you do ultimately want 2 effects. I think rush and lifesteal make a lot of sense. Sometimes maybe taunt walls could be better. Lifesteal is probably going to be important as we look at other cards in this video. Some healing just makes sense for, you know, greedier control of your Death Knights anyway. But at the end of the day, I actually think Bwonsamdi becomes this really powerful tool. We're also going to see a way to potentially resurrect your Bwonsamdi, which matters for these permanent effects. So if you resurrect him, you know, he's still going to be a 6/6 that summons a random 8 that's potentially all going to have lifesteal and rush, and it just becomes this like engine of healing and onboard trades that seems like you could use it 3 or 4 times in a given game potentially. And that sounds kind of nuts, really, right? So like, you know, the dream is play What Befell Zandalar in turn 3, wipe out your opponent's early board, play Talanji on 4, you draw the Bwonsamdi, coin him out on turn 5, because why not? And you've got this just like insane curve. Now that's not always going to hit, of course, and you know, the good news is, right, like Talanji isn't necessarily great on her own, but, you know, you can just throw down this Yeti and you know you're getting the Bwonsamdi, right? So like that's getting you a really good curve play for later, or I mean just a play for later on 6. But the Zandalar is just good on its own. Like, you're not going to mind playing that at all, and you can play it whenever too, right? So that one you just weave in any given turn, it's going to look great. And then you just set up as soon as you find Bwonsamdi, because, you know, if you have to play Bwonsamdi for Talanji, no worries, right? It's still going to be pretty good, I think, because you're potentially you know, gonna have a like rush on it already and summon a board, and then you just Talanji gets even better because now she gets to res Bwonsamdi. So really the only order that would suck, I guess, is Bwonsamdi first. You would be pretty sad about Bwonsamdi first, so that could be dead. But, you know, there's 2 other cards. You're gonna find one of them to start giving him boons and going from there. And again, if you're playing this in a late game deck, you're gonna have time, right? You're gonna be drawing cards early. You're gonna just get to a point where eventually this lines up, you get to play this Bwonsamdi and he starts swinging the game pretty hard. So again, I actually like this a lot. I think you're creating this really powerful weapon, and we're even going to see more cards in this video that support this further. I think it's kind of good on its own, and then it just gets better from there. So ultimately, I think this is actually going to be in a lot of Death Knight decks, because, you know, no rune restrictions or whatever on this either. It's just going to be able to toss into so many decks. You know, of course, I think they're probably going to want to be a little more defensive, but I don't know. Honestly, like, this could be in some mid-rangey builds or even aggressive builds too, almost, right? Like, it's not that crazy to toss it in, you know, as a kind of 1 of that's really a 3 of. But anyway, it just looks like really good output overall. So I think a great card. So next up here, let's talk about this for that Bwonsamdi synergy. This is Memoriam Manifest, a 4-mana shadow spell. Again, no rune restrictions. It summons the highest cost friendly undead that died this game. And what do you know? What do you know? Bwonsamdi is indeed an undead, guys. So that is a way to just resurrect your Bwonsamdi multiple times. Again, he's permanently going to have that rush and lifesteal. So every time he comes back, you are looking at another, you know, giant, awesome swing play on board, basically, that can go really, really far. That's probably the, you know, primary use case for this. I will note, you know, if you get Bwonsamdi summoning 8 cost stuff, there is a risk that you could kind of pollute your pool and end up getting undeads that are, you know, bigger than Bwonsamdi. I guess that's probably, you know, a 6-drop could also do that. You know, you might have like a 50-50 in that case or something, but there are definitely some 6 and 8 drops undeads that could kind of pollute your pool a little bit, so you'd have to be careful. But there's not that many. Like ultimately it's pretty unlikely you'd get an undead. It's any random thing, so it'll happen occasionally but not often. I'd say literally 90% of the time or something you'll get a non-undead, and keep the chain going to make this Memoriam Manifest a really reliable way to get more Bwonsamdis. Now again, I think that's going to be really powerful. Like he's really nice on board, particularly if he has Russian lifesteal, just a great stabilizer. The question, I guess, becomes like, can you wait on all of these cards to do all of that? Because now you're talking about, like, if you run 2 of these, that's 5 slots in your deck now committed to this Bwonsamdi plan, and a card like this might be totally dead if you don't hit the Bwonsamdi. Now it really helps that Talanji's like a tutor for him specifically, kind of gives you an extra way to get there faster. I think you'll be able to do it still. I think, again, if you're running a late game DK deck that can survive a lot and just has a lot of time to work with all the various life gain tools they're going to have access to, I think it'll work. I think you'll have time. I don't think 5 slots or whatever is too many to put in a deck like that. So I actually think this becomes a really nice tool once again for Death Knight. And, I looked at other undead resummons right now. Nothing really jumped out at me for Death Knight specifically to use this card in a different way at the moment. But there's always an opportunity for that. As soon as another powerful undead comes along, this still becomes a really cheap way to do that. Some, big style deck that cheats out a big undead and then rips it like this, like we've seen in the past with Priest, since Priest seemed to have stolen Talanji. Death Knight stole Talanji from Priest. Now they're maybe going to steal that sort of mechanic as well. So definitely a possibility to keep in mind for the future too. All right, so next up here we have Forgotten Millennium. This is an 8-cost Blood Unholy Rune Death Knight card. Fill your hand with random undead. They cost health instead of mana this turn, which we are going to kick off a little bit of a cycle here of cards that are all about kind of spending your own health, kind of a pain Death Knight build, which, as you can see from the artwork here, this includes the character Husk, the legendary from our first one here. So maybe there's a line here where you're kind of using Husk as a protection factor for your deck. That's like, hey, I'm dealing a lot of damage to myself. I want to make sure I don't get too risky here. I'm going to have a backup plan with Husk in case I take things too far. Now, the game doesn't usually let you play cards that cost health that would put you below 0. I don't think Husk will change that, having that death rattle. It'll probably still block you from playing those cards, but you might be able to take things a little further than you would have otherwise. Maybe sometimes you'd be scared to go down to 5 or whatever, but now it's like, oh, I got Husk. If I go down to 5, I can heal back 15 or whatever. I can be a little riskier, basically, with these health spending cards. Now, the question is this any good, even if you do line all that up? I'm not really so sure, right? This card is all about, like, saving, kind of like mana, being able to do some broken turn where, maybe you get some awesome, big, really expensive undead and you can spend 40 mana worth of undead or whatever, which, if you're running a Death Knight build that's got, like, a jillion health, as they tend to do, or you have Husk to protect you, maybe be willing to do that. But, like, is it actually good enough or swingy enough, like, post turn 8? Because you got to still play the 8 to get that, so you are still spending some mana and it's happening fairly late in the game. I don't know if those turns are going to be swingy enough. And a pile of random undead too. It's just hard to find synergies, hard to find lines. It's going to be some weird, awkward little stuff. Cards that just don't really help your game plan at that stage. And even the big ones don't always do things that you want, right? Just because they're big undead doesn't necessarily make them useful for any given, state of the game or whatever. There aren't even really that many big undead in standard when we look right now, by the way. I just had this open, we looked at 6s and 8s, but there aren't even really any like crazy bigger ones either. But you get stuff like Ninth Indra, it's like, okay, Chill Maw, it's like, okay, Sis Giant, it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe Sis Giant's, I don't know how that works with costing health instead. But anyway, nothing here is like you're that pumped about, even for the big ones. Maybe a No Muncher's pretty good to give you some life back, but it's not like crazy broken stuff, right? So in essence, I think this is just going to feel too slow. The payoff isn't going to be there, and it's just bakes so much risk and kind of bakes some deck commitment in as well, because you just need to have a deck that can sustain all this damage and stuff. I just don't think it's going to be worth it. So next up here is Blood Draw. This is another one that's all about health instead of mana. This one's single blood rune, 3 mana spell, Shadow. Discover a spell. This costs health instead of mana. So not the spell that you're discovering, but this instead. So this can be, a nice little way to get kind of a 0 mana discover a spell, just play it early in the game, try to find something to do, or use it as an activator where you're taking damage for some cards we're still going to see here shortly in this video, which I guess maybe I'll just show those now so that it's, we kind of have the full package picture. This is Life Render, 3 mana, 3/4 undead, battle cry. If your hero's health changed this turn, deal 6 damage to an enemy minion. So for instance, you're on turn 3, you need to change your health, you play blood draw, you deal 3 to yourself, and then you get, a 6 damage enemy minion hit, which certainly on turn 3 is going to clean up anything that you need. Gosh, and I guess that's it. I just looked through the rest of the video. There's really not another payoff card for this. I, for some reason, thought there was another one. I mean, Husk is not a payoff, but, him and Bonsonic can kind of mitigate the risks, I guess. But ultimately, really not a lot of payoff. It's just the Life Render. And this only its enemy minions, which, man, that does not seem like enough of a payoff for this. And, discovering a spell is good. I don't hate discovering a spell, and certainly a lot of Death Knights would be willing to waste 3 health to do that, probably. Just, get a tempo spell discovery for free or whatever, but it's also like not that exciting either, right? Neither of these cards feel like they're pushing this in a direction that's like so powerful or so swingy or so high tempo that it's worth doing all of this. It just feels like maybe a lot of work. Now, Life Render might exist beyond that, right? Just like having a weapon equipped could make Life Render a halfway decent tempo swing on board. But I don't know. It's just like, it feels like, again, it's just maybe not that good. I like that it kind of holds up in the mid game a bit because it can kill slightly bigger things, but it's still going to fall off super hard in the late game. You're just not going to need a card like this in effect. So yeah, I don't really see this coming together as a package. And when I look at each of these cards individually, certainly none of them really jump out at me either. They just don't really seem like they're going to be worth it at all. So fortunately, I think this is a 3-card set that falls pretty short. Yeah. So next up here, we have, I guess, kind of a random mishmash of stuff. This is Shadows of Yesterday, a 6-mana shadow spell that's double unholy, which is crazy. It has Rewind, and it summons 4 3/2 shades. They each gain random bonus effects. Random bonus effects. So 4 3/2s, that get a mix of stuff. So, we could get Divine Shield and Taunt and Rush and Lifesteal. You guys, I think, know all the bonus effects by this stage. I think the real problem for me on this is like that 3/2 stat line. Boy, that's just so weak at this stage of a game, right? The double unholy commitment also might hold this back. It's like hard sometimes envisioning a deck. Like you can have some wider board, swarmier, undead stuff, I guess. But is this really the turn 6 follow-up you want? And then the rewind on it, it's like, man, there's so many variables there because, you're talking about like 8 rolls, basically, 4 dudes with 2 rolls each. It's like Rewind is basically never going to do anything, because you got so many rolls. Like, you're just going to get like average results all the time. I guess you just take the roll for the occasional, crazy high roll. But, it's just like you're just always going to get a mix of stuff. And it's going to be, I think, pretty underwhelming on average. You're never going to get exactly 4 Divine Shields with Rush or whatever that you perfectly want, or all Lifesteal Divine Shield or something. Those exist, but it's just never going to happen. You're going to get, random little Taunt Rush guy that sucks. You're going to get, Lifesteal Poison guy or whatever that sucks. Poison is one of them, right? It's just going to be a mix of stuff you just don't care about. So I think the cost commitment on this, the deck building requirement with runes, those are both going to hold this back quite a bit. And again, the result, it just still too inconsistent even with Rewind to really feel worth it. And honestly, even if you got to pick the best results, I don't even know if this would be good in that case. If you get to pick the results, I don't even know if this would still be that powerful for 6 mana. Moving on to the Chrono Chiller. This is a 4 mana 8/7 undead. So 4 mana 7/7. Rip. We're now on 8/7s. It is Frost and Unholy, and it reads, you no longer draw a card at the start of your turn. So your natural card draw is gone. Like, you can still draw cards, if you do it manually with other things, but your natural card draw is gone. So the question becomes, another big 4-drop with downside here. Is this downside worth it for an 8/7? I maintain no. I just don't think 8/7 is really that crazy of a stat line anymore in the scheme of things. Is the downside that bad? Not necessarily. Like, certainly some decks could win before they ran out of cards. There's other ways to draw cards, like we said. You could kind of work around this downside. I just don't know if the 8/7 aspect is worth it these days. We've seen rogues playing 7 things and then dropping 2 8/8s on turn 4, right? Like, that's the world of Hearthstone these days. So what good is like an 8/7, you know, just played honestly for 4? I just don't think that's competitive enough. That, you know, like, yeah, it's still like you'd play it if it was just an 8/7. Sure, I think there'd be decks that played that, but when you mix in the downside, it's just a little too much downside for only an 8/7 for 4. So yeah, I think again this just falls too far short. All right, next up is the Cryo Frozen Champion. This is a 1-mana Frost Rune 2/1 Death Rattle. Get a random legendary minion and then reduce its cost by 1. So a little bit of a random value generator here. I mean, I like cost discounts, but man, as we've said so many times, that random legendary pool is really, really punishing. It is sometimes better when you get a random legendary in hand than when you summon it on board, because of course, like, so many wasted battle cries when you summon random things on board. You know, you just get like 3/2s with bad battle cries. Now sometimes the battle cries are a little better, but you know, ultimately it's still a card that is not likely to be synergistic with your deck. Random mix of costs, so sometimes it's hard to align. Like, are you playing this in an aggressive deck? Random legendary is probably not going to work out for you well. Playing this in a control deck, I'd rather use this slot for a better card that I know is going to have a reliable result for me, as opposed to just like a random thing that may or may not help me out and may just kind of end up being dead in hand, even given that cost discount. Rarely is that going to be worth the downside of the inconsistency. So yeah, unfortunately, you know, this is fine, but it just doesn't do enough for you. It just doesn't make the cut. And then finally, I think we're saving the best for last. Maybe the legendary is better, but this is, I think, finally a good card. It is a 2-mana Frost spell that is also double Frost Rune. You deal 3 damage and then freeze 2 random enemy minions, which, yeah, I think this is actually really nice. Like, 2 mana, deal 3, classic recipe for success. Does it stand out quite as much as it used to? No, of course not. But I think freezing 2 random enemy minions is actually rather powerful. That can buy you a lot of time sometimes. Like, yes, there will be some boards where it doesn't line up well and you hit 2 1/1s and miss the 8/8, but there will be lots of other boards where there's like one giant thing, a crazy starship or whatever on board, that you just need a moment to figure out and you need a pause. And this gives you exactly that. It gives you the time stop to find that, or maybe, you know, you make them commit into more for your big removal or whatever. And it just, you know, creates nice little gaps and timing windows for you to survive and do the cool, powerful things that your deck are looking to do. So really, really strong card, I think, at the end of the day. I guess I have some questions about the runes. Do double Frost runes hold this back? Does it not see play because there's just not a double Frost rune deck? There's 100% that possibility. You know, that's enough of a limiter that could exclude this from getting played. You know, but ultimately we have to respect the potential here, because, you know, we don't know what's going to happen over the next year plus that this is in a rotation. So, you know, as soon as a Frost deck pops up, I think this becomes a really powerful tool in that deck, and we have to respect that possibility. So therefore, I think Time Stop is actually a very powerful tool for Death Knights. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Husk Eternal Reaper is a 4-star card. Talanji of the Graves is a 5-star card. Memoriam Manifest is a 4-star card. Forgotten Millennium is a 2-star card. Blood Draw is a 2-star card. Life Render is a 2-star card. Shadows of Yesterday is a 2-star card. Chrono Chiller is a 2-star card. Cryo Frozen Champion is a 2-star card. Time Stop is a 4-star card. Man, we had an unbroken streak there of 2-star cards for a hot minute, but I think a few standouts here. I really do think Talanji has that possibility to get run in a lot of Death Knight decks and be potentially very powerful, which makes her 5-star territory. I think Husk makes sense in some slow decks. I think the Time Stop spell has a lot of potential as well. So a few standouts amongst some clunkers, but excited. I think these legendaries do have some real potential. That is nice to see. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.